Hey everyone, Tim or Riot Truexy here for the patch 17.4 rundown. This is our first patch without a bunch of systems changes, so we can really be focused on traits and champions. So let's get into it. The two patch goals. First one is 2 and 3 cross strategies. Now I kind of spoke about it in a post before, but we did nerf one cost in 17.3. We put them in a spot that I think is closer to where only one cost reroll strategy should be. I spoke about why the good and bad things there, what was the point. But what we did miss on is that the 2 and 3 cost reroll strategies didn't really rise up to fill their place. And I think that's really important in making sure that we have a cost diversity and so that everyone's not just playing on level 8 and level 9 for most of the game. So expect some swings there. And the second one is kind of a set-wide topic I want to briefly touch on in this video, which is conditionality, right? I think it's kind of been floated around that conditional comps are bad and unconditional comps are good. And I think that's not a fair representation of how we approach balance. I think conditional is more of a scale. And depending on the type of content, that conditionality should rise, go up, and or should go down. Right? So I think a form of good conditionality is hero augments or trait augments, right? It's very, very clear when you should take these and when you should succeed with them. But if you don't have any of the setup, any of the timing for it, then you're not expected to do well. Players don't really expect to do well, right? So if you had 0 copies of Nasus and then you click the Nasus hero augment with no Nasus items and then you hit really late and you go 6th, I don't think people are as viscerally negative to, man, I can't play this because it's so conditional, because it's presented in a way that's very clear, very obvious via the augment system that, hey, you need to be in a good spot for this, right? And that leads into the main lesson for Space Gods, which is TFT is really a conditional game, right? You have a lot of random items, you have a lot of random shops, and the ideal form of TFT is that those forms and those core systems of TFT lead players down different paths. And players expect that if I optimize that path given to me and I do well, that's really fun because everyone's doing different things. And I think the issue happens when too many things go on top of that core TFT conditionality, which makes all the paths too narrow. And I think that's from both sides. So if you look at 17.3, I think Corki being the quote unquote unconditional comp is not a great thing, right? I think if you could load up into the game and say that, okay, no matter what I'm going to do, I'm going to lost streak, get my perfect items, and hard force this comp, and I can succeed, which is like top 4 or top 3. I don't think that comp is fair, right? Whether it's that comp's too overpowered or the other comps aren't good enough, I don't think that's really good TFT. Similarly, I think if you load up into the game and you're like, I have the perfect LeBlanc spot, but I can't play LeBlanc 1 in 5 games. I can only play LeBlanc 1 in 5 games because of external conditions. Then that's not also good TFT because, right? Because you've had the game lead you down this path and say, oh, at the end of it, you can't actually do it. So I expect some adjustments there. And I think the biggest ones are going to be Arbiter and Psionic. I think there's some healthy forms of variance in the game, like encounters, like augments, that are really good for saying, hey, this path could be slightly better if you want to opt in, but you can normally play normal TFT and not feel overly punished. Only one system change here, and it's the Echo Boon for Specialist. I think people have been picking up that this is a really, really high damage, unconditional thing you can do, which is, hey, I put this on a random Caitlyn or a random Gnar, and it just pumps out thousands of damage. I think it's over the line. I don't think this is a great boon to have, and if I had my way, I think we could probably adjust it to be something better for specialists. But all right, first trait change is going to be Arbiter. Now this is going to take a few slides to explain, but overall it's pretty simple. TLDR is that Arbiter is only going to have 6 inputs and 6 outputs. And each of those inputs and outputs, we're going to group into categories, right? So for inputs, there's going to be a consistent category, which is going to be stuff you can do every fight. A conditional category, which is going to be, hey, it's going to be more based on the input of your champion, which is do they attack a lot, do they spend mana? The third one's going to be economy. And you'll always get one from each of these categories, right? So you're always going to have something that's consistent, something that's champion based, and something that is more about your shop and economy. Same thing for outputs. There's going to be an offensive one, a defensive one, and an economy one. And so what we've done here is that you're kind of guaranteed to get an output that's going to be good for the strategy that you want to do. If you want to load up the game, you have a good Leona spot, you can be guaranteed that you're going to be like, hey, I will have a defensive output, and I'll have one of these inputs that are generally pretty good for Leona, right? Right? I think the 50 mana one is really good on her. The 4 seconds one is good on her. Similarly, if you load up, you get a Rage Blade, and you're like, oh, I kind of want to lean toward LeBlanc. Well, you're going to have an AP or an attack speed one. You're going to have options that help LeBlanc. Similarly, if you want to kind of like Piltover, use this as an economy trait. Okay, I'm going to have that as an outlet as well, and then I can pivot into a different comp. So we really hope that this makes Arbiter more of a build your own comp rather than a random like RNG fest of, hey, did I get the right one, right, for the right situation? Because of the 6 inputs and 6 outputs, there's going to be a new combinations and removed combinations. So attack 3 times is going to have some new combos with it. We're removing the ones that honestly were either too conditional or not very powerful or exciting. We'll remove some outputs as well. This is tuning on the Arbiter combinations now that Diana is closer to the level we want. Every 3 attacks generally was quite weak. Every 4 seconds was a little bit weak. And then I think for a lot of the combat start shield games one, they were not very useful because the shield would wear off in like 4 seconds and you didn't get full value. So we've increased the duration of all the combat start shield games to 8 seconds. I'm going to pause on this one. This is another combination tuning as well. And finally, this is kind of a satisfaction buff, I guess, but it's overall a buff for sure, is that when you have those triggers that say gain X% to get a Leona or X% to get gold, going from the 2 to 3 didn't really feel that exciting or worthwhile if you can already hit 100%. Now, if you hit 100%, that will store as obviously 1 Leona or 1 gold chance. And then that extra percent will roll again. And so you can do that up to 2 times. So if you, for some reason, have a really long fight and you store 200% chance to get a Leona, you will now get 2 Leonas instead of 1. So it actually makes going from 2 to 3 on those outputs worthwhile. Psionic is the other big trait rework. Now this one is, as everyone has known from 17.3, kind of frustrating, right? You want to play Master Yi, which is the 4 cost, and you load up the game and you get an AP on the first one, and you're like, well, now my cap is kind of lowered, or I have to play 4 Psionic. So what we've done here is a pretty big change, which is all the offensive Psionic items are going to be usable on AP and AD, right? We've shifted their stats, we've shifted some of their effects so that, hey, Malware Matrix, it might not be the best item on Victor, but it's going to be usable. And when I be usable, I mean, that's a pretty aggressive term of the word usable. Like, I expect these to be decent items. So drone uplink, we've just switched the stats from AP to damage amp. So now it's a damage amp item on Master Yi. Now again, since Master Yi is melee, is it going to be his best item? I don't think so. But you can actually put this on him, carry him as a secondary unit. You can use it as a transitional item. It's still going to be best on those backliners that can use the drone really well. Malware Matrix, we've switched it to damage amp as well. It's keeping the attack speed and it's keeping the omni ramp, so it's going to be skewed toward Master Yi and those frontline carries. But the effect now changes based off the attack or magic roll. So this is when you click on the inspect panel that says like attack fighter or magic carry. That first word is what's going to determine what's happening here. And I think by default, if you're a specialist or you're a hybrid champion, you would default to magic. But the attack champion effect is not changing. It's going to be reducing the armor by 2. But magic champions, we're now going to reduce MR by 2. Before everyone gets like, oh my gosh, what about all the dot champions? This still has the I think it's 0.75 second internal cooldown for spells. So it's not going to be as insane as people are positing. Sympathetic also gets the magic and attack split. Right? It's switching to damage amp, but it still goes mana regen, so it's kind of like the opposite of Matrix. But mana regen staying the same for magic. I can't talk today. Magic champions are going to get mana regen, and then attack champions are going to get attack speed. So if you're going to put it on your pikes or Master Yis, you still get some value out of it. It's kind of like a weaker Quicksilver, but it's still usable. Target lock. Target lock is getting a rework because, one, I don't think the effect was very useful on many champions outside of exactly Pike. So it became kind of a stat stick. And honestly, if we gave that effect to magic champions, it would either be completely useless or very, very OP. This one's giving AD and AP, so it's kind of a hybrid item, and giving AS. So it's still generally better on fighters. But the new effect is when the holder damages a champion for the first time, they gain stats. Right? So this is for Pike when he hits the front line and then dashes and hits the back line, he'll hit 4 champions, he'll get 36 total AD. On on a board of like 8 champions, you would get 72 AD. For Magic champions, that becomes ability power. The number is lower. 1, because this item is meant to be AD skewed. But 2, AP champions generally have the ability to hit the board quicker than attack champions. So for the Radiant, the Psionic 4 items, these are going to mimic the same effects, but they're going to have slightly different stats. Radiant Drone is going to have 20% damage amp. Matrix is going to have, I think these are the same stats, but we're just listing them out again. Same thing for Sympathetic Implant. Again, same effect. We're just listing the stats out for the patch notes so everybody can know what they're getting. Target Lock gets more stats just like the previous one did. So the tank item is unchanged, but all the carry items are getting changed. All right, now on to the rest, the smaller trait changes. Challenger, specifically 3 and 4, are just underperforming and understated if you look at them compared to our past traits. I know there's been a Diana and MF reroll comp that's popping up. Generally that runs 2, runs 5. I think that could use the small buff, and it's not the scariest thing in the world, but we are aware of it. I think this is a good change. Nobody wants to play more than 2 Challenger. Darkstar. Probably the one like really powerful emblem trait that was on 17.3. Generally, it was just too reliant on getting the 6, right? Even if you didn't have the emblem, getting the 6 was the most important thing. Right now, we're trying to be very cautious with our changes, so we're just going to be nerfing the 6, and they're going to be monitoring how the 4 does. I think the 4 is very, very well statted if you look at it on paper. And so if 4 Darkstar is not performing to the level, it's very close, or it's a champion-specific thing. But right now, the jump from 4 to 6 Darkstar is insane, which makes it the only way to play the trait. 5 Nova has kind of fallen off since the first patch and the emblem adjustment to it. So we're kind of buffing all the 5 Nova outputs, which means, hey, if you have a carry, you can play around it and try to 5 Nova them to be the start of your comp. That should be a little bit stronger. Aatrox is going to do a little bit more damage. I think 3-star Aatrox is a very, very fun comp in 5 Nova. So I suggest that if you have, a bunch of armor items and a bunch of Aatroxes, you should try it. Usually with Caitlyn. Akali, she got buffed last patch. Didn't really jump into the meta. I think this 5 Nova buff will help. This is going to be how fast she kills the entire board, but more focused on her tank killing abilities. And Kindred's just getting a generic buff. Obviously, she's on the Master Yi board, and we don't want to just directly buff that. This is going to be for her own comp. She just gets a 5% damage amp, and she gets that mark a little bit faster. It's quite a big increase in damage for her. Other traits. Meeple. This is just the emblem. The emblem gives mana regen, which isn't really that useful on fighters, tanks, carries, right? It's only really good on casters, which make the emblem feel like not exciting. I think it was okay. Obviously, it's in the comp, but it's not really that usable. So shifting it to health and damage amp, just broader. You can put it on anyone and make them, just like our other emblems, feel like a real item. Sniper, nobody wants to play this above 2. Sometimes you just accidentally play 3 with, the Xayah, Nard, Jhin comp. So we're just buffing up the higher outputs of this. Space Groove. There's buffs to Space Groove champions, so this is not the entire buff. But the 7 is quite weak right now. I think everyone just ends at 5. I think there's some room here to buff it up along with the champions. We didn't want to touch the base right now because I think the early game of some of the champions is really, really good. And that would eat into our ability to actually buff the individual champions, which I think is the more important thing to do. Fountain. 3 Fountain, which was actually pretty good when it released, but just slightly weak, and then very, very weak at the 5. So the 5 is going from 7 to 9, much more of an offensive boost. And I think the thing with 5 Stargazer is that the trait web is really, really weak. And so we really have to bump up the power to get people to feel like it's actually worth looking at and considering versus the 3. Huntress is the weakest constellation by far. It says a nerf here for the attack speed. It's net neutral for the team-wide aura because the Stargazer attack speed is going up, so it's less good as a splash, but you're getting a lot more attack speed at the 5 and the 7. And then if you ever get 7 Stargazer, we just mark the whole enemy team because why not? All right, that's it for traits. Now moving on to champions. Twisted Fate. I don't know why there's a talent picture here. He's just sneaking in. But Twisted Fate was nerfed in 17.3. I think that was an over nerf and over cautious for the Stargazer Medallion comp, which was good for the first 2 patches. So we're just reverting it. Aatrox, this is a buff at 1-2, but mostly 3-star because I think at 1-star he's okay next to Poppy, but there's not really a reason to ever itemize him after that. Right, 2 costs. Bigger shifts here. Jax, this is a nerf to the optimal way to play him. I think flat damage reduction is a very, very unhealthy mechanic if it scales with AP, and Jax is scaled with AP. And the reason is it led to really, really unobvious itemizations for him, right? He didn't really want HP as much. He wanted Crown Guard and a bunch of AP, because if you got a bunch of AP, that meant you had a bunch of flat damage reduction, which means that you could completely nullify things like Corki, things like Ezreal, and just a lot of random damage sources. So we're making it flat. So it's always going to be 20, 25, 30, but it's not scaling with AP. Zoe hasn't found a spot as a good carry. So this is going to be a small buff at 1 and 2-star and a big buff at 3-star. This is just going to be her first time she hits a target with each direction thing. So it's not all of her damage. It's not the AoE damage. So this is looking really big on paper, but it's only about like a 10 to 12% buff. Gnar attacks really, really slow, and that makes him very inconsistent. So we're buffing him up to be a good item over, and then with a bunch of the spell damage buffs to him before, should put him in a good spot. Velvet, I'm going to say similar to Twisted Fate. Overly cautious with the nerfs to 1-cost reroll and Primordial. I think this hurt a lot. Velvet is probably the closer one that didn't need it. So we're reverting the change from last patch. And then Gwen, really, really good on stage 2, and like only stage 2 because of Space Groove. But falls off the cliff right after that. So she is in the backline a lot, so we're going to have to buff her resist to make sure she doesn't instantly die. And then giving her more of a buff at 3-star. So she can be kind of a carry in Rogue. 3 costs, again, mostly buffs here. Aurora was good for half of PBE and then was carried by Anima Squad. And now that Anima Squad is in a more reasonable spot, I think there's a lot of work there to do. She hasn't really found a good place as an actual unit, buffing her back up. Lulu, I think, is okay, and I think Stargazer has a lot of the conditionality issues that we've mentioned before. But the Mountain one is frustrating and kind of far better than the other ones because it chain stuns you. So we're reducing the stun duration. I think the other Lulus are fine. We don't want to take another 3-cost reroll out of the game. Victor is a very small buff from him. I think he's very close, and then people are kind of underplaying him as much. But he is a little hard to play. I think this plus the psionic buffs gives him a lot more options. And so if he's slightly more powerful, then that can be something that people can lean into in good spots. I think Misfortune, as people have seen at the end of 17.3, the Challenger one is quite good. And the Conduit one is close, and it's kind of tied to this like 3-cost core of like Victor and all the other conduits. So I think those are close, but the Replicator one honestly is worse than Lulu. So like, why would you play one over the other? So we're buffing that one up a little bit. All right, the other one's the tanks. Rost, his aura is just very strong. I think it eats up a lot of his power budget. I think it's good that he feels like a very strong tank to itemize, but this aura, especially late game, is just overvalued for where he is in the trait web. And then Ornn is just, he's supposed to be an early game beast and a late game like solid tank. I think right now he's like mediocre late game and not really exciting at all early game. Giving 100 HP boost, remember this is going to be a pretty big buff to him because he gets that free item. He can get a stage 2 radiant item. So I expect this to really, really warp the options around Ornn and think about, hey, I can put this on his board a lot more, build some more comps around him. Corki, 4 costs. Corki, the star of 17.3, very, very heavily reliant on Deathblades and AD. So a small tap down to his AD ratios. Again, I think Corki is close to where we want. I think we want more comps near Corki's level of like path ability, the way into it. But also note that we're also nerfing the Meeple here because it's not the greatest thing that he's only played in 5 Meeple and nothing else. Ideally, he'd be a more flexible AD unit so you didn't have to fully commit to the Meeple line. Nami, she does a lot of damage, and a lot of that damage doesn't matter, which is something that's like a core flaw of 1, AP champions and 2, Edge of Night metas, which is, hey, Nami can dump all of her damage into a training dummy and overkill and lose half of her damage, or she can dump all of her damage into an Edge of Night and lose the entire thing. And at 70 mana, that means she doesn't really cast that much, which makes it like impossible for her to win some late game fights. So this is going to be an Ornn buff, this is going to be a 7 space group buff, and this is going to be a Nami buff to her mana, so she's going to cast more often, get those rotations quicker. Xayah, I think near the end of 17.3, people kind of found that the boards around Xayah were better than they realized, but she still really, really struggles in the certain tanks, especially Rammus. So we're buffing up her ability to kill primary targets, which is going to be her base AD and her spell main target bonus damage. Generally a small shift, and I think a healthier one at her efficacy late game. And then Morgana, we should not print 2 range tanks. It makes positioning really weird. It makes mid-fight movement really weird. Moving her back down to 1 range. And she was just weak to itemize. So we're buffing at that HP scaler so that, hey, if you itemize Morgana, she can actually be that real 4-cost tank. 5 costs. Generally, we're pretty happy with the state of 5 costs for set 17. But some of them just don't carry their weight when itemized. Shen is one of them. He just, 1, is a little bit slow for his ramping fantasy, and 2, just doesn't do that much damage when he is itemized. Buffing that up, but mainly getting him off the ground a little bit faster. Graves, similarly, in a different sense, is slow to get off the ground. I think he's very powerful when he does get off the ground. But it just takes way too long. So we're buffing that base Graves from 0.7 to 0.75. This is going to help all the frames, but specifically it's going to help the marksman frame who relies more on attack speed and rage blade. This is listed as a buff. It's actually a nerf. This is probably one of the stronger outputs for the melee Graves, which is the pass through. Basically, he shoots like 4 hexes behind his target. So he's going to fall off a little bit more. That was just one thing that we saw was overperforming. So if we wanted to buff the base Graves, we don't want to make sure the ceiling. We want to make sure the ceiling isn't too out of hand. And finally, for the nerfs, we have Zed. This guy's still very, very good. So this is a 2-star nerf. And then the reverse of Shen, which is kind of ironic. He kind of gets off the ground too fast, leaving not a lot of windows for players to, pop that Edge of Night before he clones. So lowering his mana by 10. So he's going to be 1 half auto, 1 auto slower. Fiora, this is our quote-unquote Master Yi nerf. Master Yi, I think, is a pretty average to okay comp in most scenarios, mainly lifted up by augments and artifacts and Fiora. Right? And so Psionic being a quote-unquote buff to Master Yi because it's more flexible, you get to play more options with Master Yi. We thought it was fair to nerf Fiora. And Fiora is kind of the linchpin of the comp and her ability to 1, stay alive forever, and 2, kill your tank pretty quickly. So we're going to be doing a small tap down to her true damage. All right, now moving on to augments. First things are the champion augments. This Leona augment has been one of the best in the game for a while, taking a decent swing at it to bring it down from a automatic streak on stage 2 and 3 to a little bit more dependent on your items and your upgrades, especially with Arbiter being more consistent. I think this is warranted nerf. Gragas, we did no changes to him in 17.3, but people have slowly realized the correct way to build him, the correct spots to have him, and he's skyrocketed in Master, Grandmaster, Challenger. So decent hit to his damage here. Again, I think all Psionic champions are getting a small flexibility buff with their items changing. And I reached for the stars. This one was buffed in 17.3, went from one of the worst augments in the game to very, very, very strong. Also with Jax being contested in the Lulu comp, I think with Lulu Mountain being slightly less oppressive and Jax getting a small nerf, that this will open up the lines for Jax, so we felt it was safe to nerf him. So he's less contested. You can hit him easier with the hero augment. Adjusted augments. Basically, the point here is we wanted to buff a lot of the bad ones that are kind of baiting people, and then nerf some of the very oppressive combat augments. So the buffs here are 1, 2, 3, which is now misnamed. It should go back to 1s, 2, 3, but localization. Extra gold onto it. Booster pack goes from 10 to 12 gold. Matches more of our other augment frameworks. These kind of just forgotten combat augments charge transfer. The overkill is really hard to notice, and people would click it for the damage amp, which is really bad. So we're buffing that up. Climb the ladder. Verticals are a little bit more narrow this set, and so we're buffing up the stats you get from those. And Exalted Adventure, I think it's a really fun augment. 2 costs are a little bit weak, so 2 costs are getting buffed, and the rewards are getting increased. So definitely click this and have fun with it. I think it's one of the most fun augments in the set. Hard commit, just a little bit too much gold, lowering it down. Or grab bag on 2-1, not just a product of reroll being weak, because The ones on 3-2 and 4-2 are good, but this 2-1 is quite weak, so we're buffing it. 1 gold. Heart of Steel, the stacking HP augment that didn't really stack that much HP, buffing it up. Heart of the Swarm, the Prismatic Primordial augment wasn't that powerful. Both of this getting buffed. We're helping players along the journey with 2 tiny duplicators to use on 1 cost, so you're going to get less like board locked and trapped in a bad state if you're unlucky. The Apex Primordial is going to be slightly buffed. He is a tank, so he gets most of his mana from taking damage. But there's a lot of times where like he wouldn't be taking damage and he would never cast. So we're making him a little bit more consistent on that front if you do get to him. Hold the Line has just been a very, very powerful combat augment for the longest time, taking down some of those stats. Group Hug, again, it is a Master Yi augment, but if you do the math, it's kind of like above our frameworks for armor and magic resist, so we're tapping it down slightly. Kahuna Huna. This one, again, I'm less a fan of this exact augment because it's only really good in like 2 comps, and those 2 comps happen to be really good. But I think even with knowing that it's good for Master Yi, the delta between like the comp with normal combat augments and the comp with Kahuna Huna is like way too big, so we're nerfing it again. Luxury Sub, I wish this one was more fun and more clicked because it's like really exciting. We're buffing the gold up. It's been one of the worst augments in the game for a while. Mace's Will, when we made the change in 17.3 to not have it give both stats, kind of just became not that good to take on 2-1. It's more like you have my bow, so we're just no longer offering it on 2-1. 3 traits, slightly too strong with the state of artifacts and how they interact with mechs. We're nerfing it a little bit. Sunfire Board, similar to Mace's Will, it's not really a good option on 2-1 because there's no champions on the board. So we're removing that option there. Time Stream, just a miss here. Too conservative based off the reroll metas, and honestly was just a miss. Buffing that HP up to match other HP augments because it only affects time breakers, so we can let this number be pretty dreamy here. Artifact items, there are a few that are just bad for your team in the current environment, and artifacts shouldn't be a trap. Blighting Jewel doesn't have a perfect user, it has okay users, so we're buffing it up. Echo's Patience was tied to like the mech comp at the beginning of the sets. That mech comp is not that strong right now, it's kind of average, so we can bring this back up. Luden's Tempest doesn't have a great user this set, so buffing it up. Yasha's Blade Work, again, just isn't good, so giving it some power back. And this is just a quick Radiant pass. I think we should be better at curating these Radiant items, specifically the really bad ones and the really good ones. So Radiant Adaptive Helm, one of the worst Radiant items, especially on backliners, buffing that up a lot. It's a very heavy casting item that does decent damage now. Radiant Declaw it feels kind of bad when your Radiant item is like very, very conditional and doesn't actually make you tanky. So we're buffing it up. Again, the tank item, Radiant items are going to buff Orin, and Orin's already getting a buff. So that's another addition, another reason to play Orin. Radiant Gargoyle kind of just was overperforming all the other Radiant tank items. So if you ever had a Radiant Gargoyle, you got an unkillable tank. Radiant Rageblade was not good. There's not like a perfect Rageblade user this set that really loves this item, and even then it's like okay. And Radiant Nashers, I think because its stats are so synergistic, when you have a Radiant that gives you all the stats, it becomes way over the line. So we're gonna have to break the 2x stat framework here and drop the mana a little bit. It's a damage item that gives you mana, not a mana item that's insane that also gives you all your damage multipliers. And a couple small things for the emblems. Arbiter Emblem is just not that exciting because it only gives tank stats. So we're buffing up the offensive output a little bit. And we're also taking out one of the dreamier aspects of Arbiter, which is the deal 10 instances of damage, get something. And so the emblem can have a little bit more power. The Rogue Emblem has just been one of the most powerful standalone emblems in a while. It's not just a quirky thing. It's like you put this on anyone and they become very, very powerful and they get an Edge of Night. So nerfing it a little bit. Bugs. I think there's a few key ones that we addressed this patch. One, Nunu could revive himself during combat very rarely. That's been fixed. We had a tooltip bug where Morgana was listed as a 5 cost. That's back to a 4 cost. Master Yi's dash would sometimes target the incorrect enemy and cause them to dash across the board. That's been fixed. We had a Soraka's Miracle bug where if you equip 2 on the same champion, it works now. He had this gnarly Samira bug where if she fired into her CC immune target, she would keep firing for a little bit. That's been fixed. We micro patched this double up cannon into the game during 17.3, but writing it out here. So when the double up cannon would sometimes disappear, that's no longer a thing. And then some smaller things with other augments. Overall, a pretty concise patch, but we really hope it shakes up the meta a little bit, and opens up more lines to play. But enjoy it. I'm looking forward to it. I'm excited for this patch and the new champions, being introduced in the meta. So, as always, thanks for playing.